What's it take for you to fly a Climb Via SID? From the National Business Aviation Association, this is Flight Plan. I'm Pete Combs with your trusted source for business aviation news. Not long ago, we talked about issues with standard instrument departure clearances that begin with the phrase Climb Via. In this edition of NBAA's Flight Plan, we're talking about some of the practical implications of flying a Climb Via departure. With me is Keith Gordon, Director of Aviation for the Hangar, LLC. He's also NBAA's field representative for airspace development in Las Vegas and played a key role in the development of the term Climb Via. And Dave Bellistock, an Assistant Chief Pilot at Dassault Falcon Jet and President of the Teterboro Users Group. He says since Climb Via was first introduced in April 2014, compliance, especially in high-density environments, has been something of a challenge. Part of dealing with that, he says, is deciding the appropriate measure of automation.
So we can choose a number of vertical modes in a modern Falcon. It could be takeoff mode transitioning to climb, path, vertical speed, or VNAV. So clearly there are a number of choices available to us, and the next decision to make is whether to allow the auto flight, the autopilot and auto throttles to assist us in executing this procedure, all again in a time-compressed environment. And then the final piece of the equation is to engage in a comprehensive briefing so that both pilots are sharing the same plan.
But as Keith points out, that can be even more challenging when you're flying an older aircraft.
It's a lot easier in one sense because we don't have a lot of options. It really is all about the altitude pre-select. Every form of autopilot in a turbine airplane is going to have an altitude pre-selector. The crew has to thoroughly brief, has to understand what is the first altitude restriction, the second, the third, etc. You may be flying a procedure with up to eight altitude restrictions on the way up to your top altitude. You need to sit down and really look at this. And once you understand what your altitude constraints are, have the pilot not flying set that as your first target altitude and level off at that first restriction. Cross that waypoint, pilot not flying sets the next altitude in the altitude pre-select.
We'll talk more with Keith and Dave about Climb Via in just a moment. But first, please, this message.
NBAA sponsors more than a dozen seminars and professional development planning courses year-round. The courses are offered on-site at locations across the country or online. Increase your professional knowledge and advance your business aviation career with a PDP course today by visiting www.nbaa.org/on-demand.
Welcome back to NBAA's Flight Plan. I'm Pete Combs. I'm talking with Keith Gordon and Dave Bellistock about ways of tackling Climb Via SIDs. We've talked about using automation to help the stair-stepping process in both newer and legacy aircraft. But Dave says sometimes automation just isn't appropriate at all.
If a pilot fails to appropriately engage a mode, fails to understand the performance of the mode, or the automation fails to perform as expected, the pilot is now faced in a time-compressed and an altitude-compressed environment with recognizing the failure, responding to the failure appropriately, and then de-automating or hand-flying the airplane. As all of this is going on, the aircraft is climbing, as modern high-performance aircraft have extremely high climb rates, and so this allows precious little opportunity to recover. So sometimes de-automating, hand flying the aircraft, may be a preferable way to operate.
Still, Keith points out,
NextGen is all about fitting more aircraft in a smaller airspace. And the intent of the procedure designers, both SIDs and STARS, is that they be auto-flown. However, we have to be trained, we have to be skilled enough that when something happens, whether a controller has to intervene, that we have the ability to do it.
You'll find a lot more about Climb Via at our website, nbaa.org/climb-via. And that's the latest from the National Business Aviation Association. I'm Pete Combs. Thanks for listening to Flight Plan.